The beep of the heart monitor is the only sound in my son's hospital room. But in my ears, it's the echo of my own bedroom door swinging open just hours before, and the sickening sight, the used condoms scattered across his and his wife's wedding bed. I'm back in the hospital now, holding my son's cold hand, trying to breathe, trying to piece together the fragments of a world that shattered in a single afternoon. It all started with a phone call. But first, wherever you're listening, I'd appreciate it if you could leave a like or a comment below. It would mean a lot to have your encouragement right now. The phone had rung just as I was carefully watering the African violets on my windowsill. They were my late husband David's pride and joy, and tending to them was a small, quiet ritual that connected me to him. The afternoon sun was warm on my face, and the only sound in my small, tidy apartment was the gentle hum of the refrigerator. It was a peaceful Tuesday, a day like any other, built on the predictable rhythms and routines that had become my anchor in the years since he'd passed. When the caller ID flashed Alicia's name, a genuine smile touched my lips. I expected a call about her Sunday pot roast recipe, which she could never quite get right, or perhaps a funny story about the grandkids. "Sophia, it's me." Her voice was a thin, reedy thing, stretched taut with a frantic energy I'd never heard from her before. "There's been a little accident at the construction site." The small green watering can slipped from my fingers, thudding onto the carpet and leaving a dark, spreading stain. My heart felt as though it had been squeezed by an icy fist. My son, my Jake, was a foreman. His world was one of steel beams hanging in the sky, of concrete and heavy machinery. It was a world that made my stomach clench with a low-grade fear every single morning when he left for work. "Is he okay? Alicia, tell me he's okay." My own voice was a stranger's, thin and desperate. "He's fine, Mom, he's fine." "Well," she said, the words tumbling out in a rush, too fast to be truly comforting. "But the doctors want to keep him for observation, just a precaution. Don't you worry, really." But a mother knows. You know that feeling, don't you? It's not a thought. It's a physical sensation, a deep thrumming in your bones that tells you when something is fundamentally wrong. The forced calm in her voice was a louder alarm than any siren could ever be. I could feel the lie of it, a slick, oily coating over each word she spoke. I mumbled a goodbye and hung up the phone, my hands trembling so badly I could barely place the receiver back in its cradle. The water stain on the carpet, the forgotten violets, they all faded into the background. My world had narrowed to a single, terrifying point: Jake. The drive to St. Jude's Hospital was a nightmare. The familiar streets of our North Carolina town became a hostile landscape of red lights and impatient horns. Every stoplight felt like a personal affront, a delay keeping me from my son. I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles white, rehearsing what I would find. I pictured Jake with his arm in a sling, maybe a few stitches over his eye, giving me that familiar lopsided grin of his. He'd tell me I was being a worrywart, just like his father always had. I clung to that image like a prayer, but the reality that greeted me was cold, sterile, and silent. He was lying in a narrow bed in the emergency ward, a thin white sheet pulled up to his chest. His vibrant, sun-kissed skin was a pale, waxy gray under the unforgiving glare of the fluorescent lights. An IV tube snaked from a bag of clear fluid into the back of his hand. He looked small, diminished, a fragile echo of the strong, vital man who had just left my apartment 2 days ago after helping me move a heavy bookcase. Alicia was sitting in a plastic chair by the window, not looking at her husband, but absorbed in the blue glow of her phone screen. A young doctor with exhaustion etched into the lines around his eyes pulled me aside into the bustling hallway. "Mrs. Miller," he began, his voice low and kind, "your son didn't have a fall. He collapsed on the job site. He's suffering from severe dehydration and what appears to be chronic exhaustion. His blood pressure is dangerously low. We're rehydrating him and running a full panel of tests, but frankly, it looks like he's been running on fumes for a very long time." The doctor's words were clinical, but they landed on me with the force of a physical blow. Not an accident, a collapse. Alicia hadn't just bent the truth. She had fabricated a completely different story. It was the first lie I could prove, the first one that stood out in stark, undeniable relief. I didn't know then that it was merely the visible peak of a vast and treacherous mountain of deceit buried just beneath the surface. I returned to the room, the doctor's words echoing in my ears, and sat by my son's side. I gently stroked his hair, still damp with sweat, his skin cool and clammy. My mind was a raging storm of unanswered questions, and a cold, heavy dread began to settle in the pit of my stomach. For what felt like an eternity, I just sat there, memorizing the pale geography of my son's face, listening to the rhythmic beep of the monitor that was tracking his heart. Alicia finally looked up from her phone, a flicker of annoyance in her eyes before she smoothed it into a mask of concern. She stood, stretching her back as if she'd been sitting vigil for hours. "Mom, could you do me a huge favor and go back to the house to get some of Jake's personal things? His DOP kit, a fresh change of clothes. I really need to stay here and fill out this mountain of paperwork." Her thumb was already swiping across the screen again. A knot of reluctance tightened in my chest. The thought of leaving Jake's side, even for an hour, was unbearable. But her request was practical. He would need his things. I gave a small, tight nod, my throat too constricted to form words. The drive to their house, the beautiful two-story colonial that David and I had poured our own savings into to help them afford, felt different this time. The familiar street, lined with the majestic oak trees, seemed alien and menacing. The cheerful yellow front door, a color Alicia had insisted on, felt like a garish joke. I let myself in with my key. The house was eerily quiet, but it was a heavy, watchful silence, as if the walls themselves were holding a dirty secret. I walked up the carpeted stairs, my hand trailing along the smooth oak banister, a muscle memory from countless visits. I pushed open the door to their master bedroom. The first thing that hit me was the smell. A cloying, cheap men's cologne that was so thick in the air I could almost taste it. It was an aggressive, musky scent, nothing like Jake's subtle, clean aftershave. The room was a disaster zone, clothes strewn over chairs, a half-empty glass of what looked like whiskey sweating onto the antique nightstand. But it wasn't the clutter that made the air freeze in my lungs and my blood turn to ice. It was what I saw scattered on the floor beside the bed, what I saw obscenely caught on the silk lampshade, what was peeking out from under the corner of a pillow on Jake's side of the bed, used condoms, little latex ghosts of a sick, sordid encounter strewn across the very room my son slept in every night, on the beautiful hand-stitched quilt I had spent 6 months making for their wedding gift. My stomach twisted into a knot of pure, violent revulsion. A hot, acidic bile rose in my throat, and I had to clamp my hand over my mouth, my whole body shaking, to keep from being sick right there on their plush beige carpet. I stumbled backward, my hand flailing out to find the wall to keep me from collapsing. My vision swam. It felt as though I had walked onto a crime scene, the scene of a profound and unspeakable desecration of everything I held sacred. My eyes, blurry with the shock of it, scanned the room in a desperate, horrified daze. They landed on the nightstand on Alicia's side of the bed. There, amidst the jumble of fashion magazines and empty water bottles, lay a men's gold watch. It was a flashy, ostentatious thing, heavy and gleaming, the kind of piece Jake, with his simple, understated taste, would never ever wear. My hand trembled violently as I reached for it. The metal was heavy and cold against my skin, a dead weight. I turned it over. On the back, an inscription was elegantly engraved in a flowing feminine script. To my Kyle, forever yours. A. The A was a looping, stylized flourish. Alicia, Kyle. My heart didn't just break. It detonated. It felt like a piece of glass dropped from a skyscraper, exploding into a million razor-sharp fragments in my chest. This wasn't a one-night mistake. This wasn't a drunken, regrettable slip-up. An engraved watch spoke of time, of affection, of an ongoing relationship. It was a calculated, deep-seated betrayal, happening while my son was literally working himself to the point of collapse to provide for his family. I placed the watch back on the table, the cold of the metal seeming to seep directly into my bones, a deep cellular chill that had nothing to do with the temperature of the room. I don't remember the drive back to the hospital. The familiar roads were a meaningless smear of traffic lights and street signs. My mind was a roaring void, a vacuum of shock and horror. On pure, unthinking instinct, I pulled into the parking lot of St. Michael's, the small church on a side street where David and I had been married, where Jake had been baptized. I cut the engine and let my head fall forward onto the steering wheel, the plastic cool against my forehead. I couldn't cry. It was as if the horror was too immense for tears. The emotional circuits overloaded and shut down. The wells had run dry. Instead, I prayed. It wasn't a weak, pleading prayer of a victim. It was the prayer of a survivor, a demand for strength. Lord, I whispered into the silence of the car, my voice raw, you have shown me the truth in all its ugliness. Now, please grant me the wisdom to know what to do with it. Grant me the courage to face it without flinching. And grant me the unwavering strength to protect what's left of my family. As I sat there, cocooned in the stillness of my old Buick, I felt something shift deep inside me. The searing pain was still there, a white-hot ember in the center of my chest. But the fear, the helpless, dizzying confusion, it began to recede. In its place, a cold, hard resolve started to form, solid and unyielding as granite. I am a survivor of Hurricane Katrina. I watched the black waters of the storm surge swallow everything David and I had ever owned. I saw our home, our photographs, our entire history washed away. We had rebuilt our lives from nothing, from the wet, muddy ground up, with our bare hands and our faith. I had faced down the chaos of nature. I would not be defeated by the calculated chaos of a cruel and deceitful woman. When I walked back into Jake's hospital room, Alicia was there, dabbing at the corners of her dry eyes with a tissue in a pathetic theatrical display of sorrow. "Oh, Mom, you're back." I was getting so worried. I looked at her. I really looked at her. It was no longer the gaze of a mother-in-law, clouded by affection and a willingness to see the best. It was the clear, sharp gaze of a woman who had seen the true face of her enemy. I said nothing about what I had found in their bedroom. I walked over to the bed, took a warm washcloth from the basin a nurse had left, and began to gently wipe my son's face. As I looked at his gaunt features, at the dark, bruised-looking circles under his eyes, all the scattered, confusing pieces of the last few years suddenly slammed into place with brutal clarity. The large sums of money that had vanished from their joint account, which Alicia had airily dismissed as bad investments. The dozens of small instances where she had subtly belittled my memory in front of others, making me sound like a dotty old woman for forgetting some minor detail. The hushed, secretive phone calls she would take in the other room, ending them abruptly if I walked in. The disgusting, stomach-turning infidelity was just a symptom. The real disease, I now understood, was the deep-seated greed and deception that had been rotting my family from the inside out. I knew with absolute chilling certainty what I had to do. This wasn't the end of a bad day. This was the beginning of a war. Alicia approached the bedside, her face a carefully constructed mask of sympathy. She reached for my hand, her voice dripping with fake concern. "Mom, we have to be strong for him." Her own voice trembled slightly, a masterful performance of the devoted, worried wife. A week ago, a day ago, I would have pulled her into a hug, whispering words of comfort. We would have been two women united in our love for Jake, a bulwark against the world. But now, her touch felt like a spider's crawl on my skin, and I had to resist the urge to recoil. I gently pulled my hand away and turned my attention back to my son, fussing with the corner of his blanket. I said nothing, not a word of accusation, not a single question. My silence, my calm, unnerving composure seemed to throw her off balance more than any angry outburst could have. I could see a flicker of confusion, then wariness, dance in her eyes. She started to talk more, a nervous, babbling stream of words filling the quiet space, chattering about doctors and test results and insurance forms, empty noise meant to distract from the truth. I just watched her. I watched the way her eyes darted to the screen of her phone every few seconds. I watched the impatient tap, tap, tap of her perfectly manicured fingernails against the vinyl arm of the chair. I was no longer seeing a grieving daughter-in-law. I was seeing a B-list actress, one who was terrified her play was about to be canceled, and I had decided to sit in the front row and watch the entire pathetic performance unfold. She eventually made an excuse about needing to make another phone call, her voice tight with an irritation she could no longer conceal. She practically fled the room, leaving me alone with the steady, rhythmic beeping of the machines that were tethering my son to the world. The memory of that morning in my kitchen, just a few weeks ago, came flooding back, but this time it was tainted, poisoned by the knowledge I now possessed. I could see it all with a horrifying new clarity. The cheerful yellow sunlight streaming through the window, the floral pattern on the mug of chamomile tea she had made for me, her sweet, convincing smile as she spread a stack of papers on my kitchen table. She had spoken about simplifying things for the kids, about making sure everything was in order just in case something happened to me. She called it a power of attorney, a simple document, she'd said, to make it easier for her and Jake to manage my savings account, to pay my bills from it if I ever got sick and couldn't manage things myself. I remembered the heavy, unfamiliar weight of the fancy fountain pen in my hand, the smooth, dark glide of the ink as I signed my name where she pointed. I was signing away control of my life savings, The money David and I had painstakingly rebuilt, dollar by dollar, after Katrina had washed our world away in New Orleans. We had worked double shifts, lived in a cramped FEMA trailer for a year, invested every spare penny wisely, all to build a foundation not just for ourselves, but for our son and his future family. In that moment, signing those papers, I had believed it was an act of profound love and trust. Looking back now from this cold, sterile hospital room, I saw it for what it was, a perfectly laid trap sprung with a gentle smile and a warm cup of tea. Alicia had taken my love for my grandchildren, the purest thing in my heart, and twisted it into a weapon to use against me. My own phone buzzed on the nightstand, startling me from my dark reverie. It was my granddaughter, Lily. "Grandma? How's Dad? Mom just said he has the flu." Her sweet, innocent voice was a painful counterpoint to the sordid reality of the situation. "He's going to be fine, sweetie," I said, my voice catching in my throat. I fought to keep it steady, to protect her from the ugliness. "Your dad just needs to rest up for a few days." We spoke for a few more minutes, her cheerful chatter about school and her soccer team a world away from this place of hushed tones and antiseptic smells. After we hung up, I stared out the hospital window at the sprawling city below, the cars like tiny determined insects. I remembered a strange comment my 7-year-old grandson, Jake Jr., had made a few weeks back. He'd asked me out of the blue, "Grandma, who is Uncle Kyle?" At the time, I had been confused. We didn't have a Kyle in the family. Alicia had quickly shushed him, laughing it off, saying he must have been talking about a character from a TV show. My heart had ached then, a small, cold fear that perhaps my memory was beginning to fail me, as David's had in his final years. Now, I felt a surge of pure, cold fury. She wasn't just deceiving her husband. She was lying to her own children, manipulating them, forcing them to be keepers of secrets they didn't even understand. This fight was no longer just about Jake or about the money. It was for the future of those two precious children. I had to win back not just their inheritance, but a truth that hadn't been contaminated by their mother's endless lies. Jake had given me the password to his mobile banking app years ago, just in case of an emergency, he'd said with a grin. I looked at his still form in the bed, the shallow rise and fall of his chest. "This is an emergency," I told myself. My fingers trembled slightly as I pulled out my phone and typed in the familiar password. What I saw on the screen made me feel like all the air had been vacuumed out of the room. This wasn't just a matter of a few $100s unaccounted for. This was a systematic bleeding, a hemorrhage of their financial lifeblood. Luxury Resort Maldives, $5,400. Crypto wallet transfer, $10,000. Online casino deposit, $2,500. Valentino handbags, $3,200. Line after damning line of extravagant, inexplicable charges. A $5,000 trip to the Maldives. Jake hadn't taken a real vacation in over a year. A $10,000 transfer to a crypto wallet. My son thought Bitcoin was something you found in a pirate movie. This wasn't reckless spending. This was a deliberate, methodical draining of their life savings. It was all under my son's name, but I knew whose hands had been on the keyboard, whose greedy desires were being funded by my son's sweat and exhaustion. My blood ran cold. The situation was infinitely, terrifyingly worse than I could have ever imagined. I had to escape the confines of that room, the beeping machines, the smell of disinfectant. I found my way to the small, quiet hospital chapel on the ground floor. It was empty, the only light filtering through the tall stained glass windows, casting soft pools of jewel-toned color on the polished wooden pews. I knelt, but not in desperation. I took the small, worn Bible I always carried in my purse, its pages as soft as old cloth from years of use. My fingers traced the familiar gilded edges until they landed on a passage from Timothy, one David used to read to me when I felt overwhelmed by the world. For God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind. Power, love, a sound mind. I read the words over and over, letting them sink into the marrow of my bones. That was my prayer now. That was what I needed. Not revenge, justice, not rage, clarity. As I sat there in the sacred silence, a profound and unexpected sense of peace settled over me. The storm was still raging outside the chapel walls, but inside my soul, I had found my anchor. I left the chapel with a new, unshakable sense of purpose. I didn't go back to Jake's room immediately. I found a quiet, deserted corner in the hallway, took a deep breath, and dialed the number for my bank from memory. Federal American Bank, how may I help you? The voice on the other end was crisp, efficient, and blessedly impersonal. Hello, I said, and was surprised by the calm, unwavering steadiness in my own voice. My name is Sophia Miller. I'm calling to report suspicious activity and to request an immediate freeze on all joint accounts held in my name and in the names of my son, Jacob Miller, and my daughter-in-law, Alicia Miller. There was no hesitation, no tremor. It wasn't a request. It was a command. The first shot in the battle to reclaim what was mine had been fired, not with a loud, angry bang, but with a quiet, resolute whisper over a telephone. The next day, a call came from an unfamiliar number. Mrs. Miller, this is Billy Rios, the branch manager at Federal American Bank. We received your request. I wanted to personally confirm that a temporary freeze has been placed on the accounts as per protocol. His voice was professional, but I could hear an undercurrent of genuine concern that went beyond a script. I've also taken the liberty of flagging several recent overseas transactions that are highly irregular. The amounts and destinations are consistent with patterns we see in fraud cases. Would you like me to connect you directly with our fraud department? Yes, please, I said, a wave of profound relief washing over me. It was real. I hadn't overreacted. My instincts were right, and my actions were being validated by the very system she had tried to exploit. I wasn't a lone, hysterical old woman. I was a client with rights. There were rules. There were procedures designed to protect people like me, and I had just set them in motion. When I returned to the hospital room, I found Alicia pacing back and forth like a caged animal, her face flushed, phone clutched in her hand. She was trying to complete a purchase online. I could tell from her frustrated muttering. "This is unbelievable," she said, just loud enough for me to hear. "This card worked perfectly yesterday. What is wrong with this stupid bank?" She tossed the phone onto the chair with an angry grunt and then turned to me, forcing a strained, brittle smile. "Must be some kind of system error. Technology, right? Do you want some coffee, Mom?" I just shook my head slowly, my eyes fixed on Jake, who was stirring slightly in his sleep. I could see the raw panic behind her brittle smile. A significant crack had just appeared in her wall of lies. I knew with a certainty that settled deep in my gut that it wouldn't be long before the whole thing came crumbling down. She was more desperate and more vicious than I had realized. The following day, A well-dressed woman in a navy blue suit appeared at the door and introduced herself as a social worker from Adult Protective Services. "Mrs. Miller," she said kindly but firmly, her eyes assessing me, "we received an anonymous report expressing concern that you might be experiencing some mental confusion and perhaps exerting inappropriate pressure on the family's finances." For a second, I was stunned into absolute silence. It was a vicious, brilliant move to use my age, my grief, my concern against me, to paint me as the confused, interfering old woman. But then the words from the chapel echoed in my mind. A sound mind. I took a deep breath, looked the woman directly in the eye, and calmly invited her to sit down. I answered every one of her questions with painstaking precision and clarity. I recalled specific dates of doctor's appointments, recent financial transactions, even the exact amount of my last donation to the church bake sale. I was lucid, coherent, and in complete command of my faculties. I was not a woman in decline. I was a woman at war. The social worker, to her credit, seemed convinced, but she said she was obligated by law to follow up. Alicia's poisoned arrow had been aimed at the heart of my credibility, but it had missed its mark, for now. That afternoon, Jake finally woke up for more than a few minutes at a time. He whispered my name, his voice raspy and weak. I took his hand, my heart swelling with a fierce, protective love. He was quiet for a long time, just watching me, his eyes clouded with a terrible confusion. Then he said, "Mom, I knew something was wrong, not the affair. I never would have. I didn't know that. But the bills. I knew I'd paid the electric bill, but then we got a shut-off notice. Alicia said she'd taken care of it, that the company must have made a mistake. And my investment account. She said the market was volatile and it was best not to look at it for a while. I felt like I was going crazy, Mom. Like I couldn't trust my own mind anymore." Tears welled in my eyes as I smoothed his hair back from his forehead. His confession was the most painful proof yet of Alicia's insidious psychological warfare. She hadn't just stolen his money. She had deliberately and systematically eroded his confidence, making him doubt his own sanity. It was a cruelty so profound, so intimate, it took my breath away. Later, a young nurse named Maria, who had been so gentle and attentive with Jake since he'd been admitted, came in to check his vitals. As she was leaving, she caught my eye and gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod toward the hallway. I followed her out. She lowered her voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "I really shouldn't get involved in family business, Mrs. Miller," she said, her young face serious. "But your daughter-in-law? She's barely been here since your son was admitted. And she's had a visitor, a man named Kyle. He comes by whenever she's on duty. They meet in the cafeteria." Maria's words were the final, irrefutable confirmation from an outside source. The betrayal was no longer just my secret to bear. There was a witness. A kind, decent stranger had seen the truth and had the courage to speak it. I thanked her, my voice thick with emotion, my hands clasped together to keep them from shaking. Every new piece of evidence solidified my resolve. This wasn't just about anger anymore. It was about a clear, methodical pursuit of justice. That evening, long after Jake had fallen into a deep, healing sleep, I sat in the uncomfortable vinyl chair by the window, watching the city lights glitter like a fallen constellation in the darkness. I had my son's testimony. I had the nurse's confirmation. And I had the damning, undeniable evidence from the bank statements. The time for grieving my shattered illusions was over. The time for smart, decisive action had come. I remembered seeing a notice in the church bulletin weeks ago, a small announcement for a free legal aid service for senior citizens. I dug through my purse and miraculously found the folded, crumpled piece of paper. With a resolve that felt as solid and unshakable as steel, I walked out into the quiet, brightly lit hospital corridor, the cold linoleum floor gleaming under my feet, and I dialed the number. This fight wouldn't be won with tears or shouting matches. It would be won with the cold, hard letter of the law. The office of Kayla George, attorney at law, was in a dignified old brick building downtown, the kind with real wood paneling and the faint, pleasant smell of old books and lemon polish. She was a formidable woman in her 50s, with sharp, intelligent eyes that seemed to see right through you, and a handshake that was firm and reassuring. I sat in a leather chair across from her polished mahogany desk and told her everything. I started with the disgusting discovery in the bedroom, the gold watch, the bank statements, the visit from the social worker, and ended with Jake's confused, heartbreaking confession from his hospital bed. I didn't cry. I recounted the facts calmly, methodically, as if I were a witness giving a statement in a case that had nothing to do with me. It was the only way I could get through it. Kayla listened intently, her pen scratching occasionally in a leather-bound notebook. She didn't interrupt once, her gaze never leaving my face. When I finally fell silent, the story told, she looked at me for a long moment, and I saw not pity, but a deep professional respect in her eyes. "Mrs. Miller," she said, her voice firm and ringing with conviction, "you did absolutely the right thing by coming here. What they have done to you is not just immoral, it's illegal, and we are going to fight it." For the first time in what felt like an eternity, I felt the ground beneath my feet begin to solidify. I had a real ally, a champion. 2 days later, Kayla called me at my apartment. "Sophia, I have some news, and I suggest you sit down. It's not good." I did a check on Jake's will at the county records office. It appears there are two versions. The most recent one, filed 3 months ago, states that in the event of his death, all his assets, including the house and his stock portfolio, go directly and solely to Alicia. You, Sophia, are left with nothing. I sank onto the sofa, the phone feeling slick in my hand. I couldn't breathe. "The signature," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "We had a forensic handwriting expert look at a digital copy." Kayla's voice turned hard as iron. "It's a forgery, Sophia. A very good one, but a forgery nonetheless. This is no longer just a case of financial abuse. This is a premeditated plot to steal his entire legacy." The room seemed to tilt and spin. The sheer scale of Alicia's wickedness, the cold, calculating nature of her betrayal, was beyond anything I could have possibly conceived. She hadn't just been stealing from their present. She had been planning to steal my son's future, and by extension, his children's. I had to tell Jake. It was one of the hardest things I've ever had to do in my life. Sitting by his hospital bed, his strength slowly returning, I gently explained about the forged will. He listened in absolute silence, his face growing paler and paler with each word I spoke. Then he broke. Deep, ragged sobs shook his body, the sound of a heart not just breaking, but being utterly shattered. "Dad would be so disappointed in me, Mom," he choked out between sobs, his face buried in his hands. "His stamp collection, the one he started when he was a boy, I sold it. I sold it a few months ago. Alicia said she needed the money for an expensive new medical procedure for you. She said you were sick but didn't want to tell anyone because you were too proud. I believed her, Mom. God help me. I believed her. Her cruelty was a bottomless pit. It was a new, more profound layer of hell. She hadn't just taken the money from a priceless collection David had spent his life curating. She had used Jake's pure, selfless love for me as the leverage to do it. She had weaponized his filial piety against his own family, desecrating the memory of his good and honorable father in the process. Alicia, now completely cut off from her illicit cash flow, showed up at my small apartment, her face a mask of raw, naked fury. The sweet, concerned daughter-in-law was gone, replaced by a snarling stranger. "You have to lift that freeze now!" she screamed the moment I opened the door. "You have no idea what you're doing, you stupid, interfering old woman." I looked her straight in the eye, my own fear extinguished by a cold, righteous anger that burned away everything else. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I said only one sentence, my voice as calm and steady as a frozen lake in winter. "My lawyer will be in contact with you." Then I closed the door in her face. The soft, final click of the deadbolt sliding into place was as loud and definitive as a gunshot. I could hear her screaming and pounding on the other side, a tirade of curses and threats. But inside my apartment, there was only a profound and deeply satisfying silence. Later that evening, my doorbell rang again. I tensed, my heart pounding. But when I looked through the peephole, I saw the kind, wrinkled face of Mrs. Henderson from the church choir. I opened the door, and she thrust a steaming pot of her famous chicken noodle soup into my hands. "Sophia, dear, we were all so worried when you missed practice," she said, her eyes crinkling at the corners with genuine concern. "The ladies got together and made you a few casseroles for the week. We don't know what's going on, dear, but we want you to know you are not alone." I took the warm pot, the heat seeping into my cold, trembling hands. That simple act of kindness, of community, of women looking after their own, was a powerful antidote to Alicia's poison. It was a tangible reminder that her attempt to isolate me, to make me feel alone and crazy, had failed utterly. Tears finally came, hot and fast, but this time they were tears not of pain, but of overwhelming gratitude. As I sat in my small, quiet kitchen later, looking at the containers of food my friends had brought, I thought about how close Alicia had come to succeeding. She had tried to make me doubt myself, my own mind, my own reality. And it made me wonder, listening to this, have you ever had someone in your life try to make you question your own reality? Make you feel isolated and alone, even when you're surrounded by people who should love you? If you feel comfortable, please share your story in the comments. Let's show each other that we are not alone in these silent battles. I needed to go back to Jake's house to pick up more of his clothes and sort through the mail that was piling up. As I was fumbling with the keys at the front door, feeling like a stranger at a place that was once so familiar, Mrs. Gable, the sweet, eagle-eyed woman who lived across the street, came bustling over, her walker clicking softly on the pavement. "Sophia, dear, I'm so glad to see you. I've been so worried," she said, her voice a low, confidential whisper as she glanced back at her own front door. "There have been some strange goings-on, dear. I don't like to gossip, you know I don't. But there have been some strange cars parked out front late at night. Not Jake's truck." And last week, oh, it must have been Thursday, I saw Alicia in a terrible shouting match with a man in one of those fancy sports cars, all low to the ground and loud. He looked very, very angry, Sophia, waving his hands about. It gave me a fright. Mrs. Gable's words, delivered with a concerned frown, were another crucial piece of the puzzle. It confirmed that Alicia wasn't just having a clandestine affair. She was embroiled in some kind of serious trouble with her lover. Their wicked alliance, built on a foundation of lies and greed, was already starting to fracture from within. I thanked her for her concern, my mind racing. Jake was getting stronger every day, physically. He was out of the hospital, staying with me in my small 2-bedroom apartment, but his mind was still a foggy landscape, trying to piece together months and years of subtle manipulation. One afternoon, as I was reading a novel aloud to him to pass the time, he sat bolt upright on the sofa, his eyes wide with a sudden terrible clarity. "I remember now, Mom," he said, his voice trembling with the shock of the unearthed memory. "It was late, a few months ago. I'd just gotten home from a double shift at the site. I was so tired I could barely see straight. Alicia came to me with a thick stack of papers, said they needed to be signed right away. She said they were just updated life insurance forms, something about a better rate, to make sure you and the kids were taken care of if anything ever happened to me. I didn't even read them, Mom. I was half asleep. I just signed where she pointed. God, Mom, I trusted her." His words confirmed my worst fears. The forged will, the power of attorney, it had all been done under the sophisticated guise of love and responsibility, executed at a moment of extreme physical and mental vulnerability. She hadn't just taken advantage of his trust, she had taken advantage of his exhaustion, an exhaustion brought on by him working to provide the very life she was secretly dismantling. A few days later, my phone rang. It was an unknown number. The moment I answered, Alicia's voice, no longer sweet or even angry, but tight with a venomous reptilian coldness, hissed through the receiver. "You think you're so smart, don't you? You think you've won. You're ruining my life. If you don't stop this, you will regret it. I will make sure everyone in this town thinks you're a senile old woman who belongs in a nursing home. I will take your grandchildren away from you forever." The mask was completely and irrevocably gone. This was a direct threat, a final, desperate attempt to intimidate me with the cruelest weapons she had left. I listened silently, my own heart pounding against my ribs, letting her spew her poison into the void. When she was finally done, breathless with her own hate, I replied calmly, my voice a quiet counterpoint to her screeching. "If you have anything further to say, Alicia, you can say it to my lawyer." Then I hung up. My hand was shaking, but my heart strangely was steady as a rock. A nagging intuition, a whisper from deep within, sent me back to Jake's home office one more time. This time, I didn't look for the obvious. I dug deep into a dusty cardboard box in the back of the closet, a box filled with his old college textbooks that he'd never had the heart to throw away. Tucked inside a thick, heavy chemistry tome, its pages filled with formulas he'd long since forgotten, I found it. A small black leather-bound notebook. It felt out of place, alien among the academic texts. I opened it. It was Alicia's elegant, looping handwriting. Page after page detailed online gambling sites, dates, and staggering losses that made me feel dizzy. And then, the most damning evidence of all, a list of names, including Kyle, with huge, terrifying sums of money written next to them. These were her debts. This wasn't just the diary of a gambling addict. This was a detailed map of her motive. Alicia wasn't just greedy for a life of luxury. She was drowning in a sea of debt, desperate and cornered. Holding the book, a shiver of real fear went down my spine. This was a woman with nothing left to lose. But with the fear came a profound sense of relief. Finally, the whole twisted picture was clear. I thought of something our pastor always said in his sermons. Sometimes, God doesn't calm the storm. He calms his child in the midst of the storm. I realized in that moment that faith wasn't about passively waiting for a miracle to save you. It was about having the courage and the clarity to act when the truth is laid bare right in front of you. I took out my phone and methodically, carefully photographed every single page of the notebook, ensuring every name and every number was crystal clear. Then, without a moment's hesitation, I emailed the images to Kayla George with a simple, powerful subject line: The Smoking Gun. Kayla called me back within 5 minutes. Her voice was electric with a new energy. Sophia, this is it. This is the Rosetta Stone of our case. She explained that the notebook provided a clear, undeniable motive for the fraud, and that the massive debt to Kyle proved she was under extreme pressure, possibly even being controlled or blackmailed by her accomplice. We're not on the defensive anymore, Sophia, Kayla said, her voice filled with a new, aggressive confidence. We're going on the attack. I'm filing for an immediate restraining order to keep her away from you, the children, and the house, based on this concrete evidence of her instability and the potential danger she poses. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt like I wasn't just treading water, trying to salvage the wreckage of my family. I felt like I was actively building a firewall, a legal fortress to protect my grandchildren's future from the flames of their mother's desperate, destructive life. Kayla George arranged a meeting with Alicia's lawyer. It was not a negotiation, it was a declaration of terms. She told me about it later, her eyes still glinting with the fire of the confrontation. She had laid out the evidence on the polished conference table like a series of blows: the forged will, the bank statements, the nurse's testimony, and finally, the printed out pages from the gambling ledger. We have irrefutable proof of will forgery, systematic financial exploitation, and a ledger detailing your client's massive gambling debts, Kayla had stated, her voice like ice. Furthermore, we have a witness to her relationship with a Mr. Kyle, to whom she owes a substantial amount of money. Your client has 2 options. 1, she cooperates fully with the police, gives a full confession, and hopes for a sliver of leniency. Or 2, we proceed with a full criminal prosecution on all charges, and with this mountain of evidence, she will be facing a very, very long time in prison. The legal trap was set. The final move had been made. There was no escape. Jake, now looking more like his old self, agreed to see Alicia one last time. He chose a neutral location, a quiet, anonymous coffee shop downtown. I didn't go with him. As much as my protective instincts screamed for me to be there, I knew this was a painful journey he had to complete on his own. He told me about it later that evening, his voice quiet and heavy with a weary sadness. He said he only asked her one question, the one that had been haunting him. Why? Her answer, he said, was not an apology. It was a long, rambling, pathetic litany of excuses, blaming her difficult upbringing, her bad luck, blaming him for working too much, even blaming me for being too perfect a mother-in-law. She blamed everyone and everything except herself. There was no remorse in her eyes, he said, no shred of guilt for what she had done to him and to their beautiful children. He told me that in that moment, looking at the bitter, resentful stranger across the table, the woman he had loved was truly gone. "I've filed for divorce, Alicia," was the last thing he said to her before he stood up, placed a $10 bill on the table for their coffees, and walked away, leaving their shattered past behind him. The police, armed with the evidence from the bank and our formal complaint, brought Kyle in for questioning. Faced with the gambling ledger and the threat of being an accessory to major fraud, he crumbled almost immediately. He was a coward, more scared of prison than he was loyal to Alicia. The plan was for Jake to have an accident at work, he confessed to the detectives, his voice shaking. A bad fall. I was supposed to arrange it. Alicia had the power of attorney, the forged will. While everyone was grieving, she would have liquidated everything: the house, the stocks, the trust funds. It would all be converted to cash and wired offshore within a month. There would have been nothing left. When Kayla relayed this information to me over the phone, I had to sit down on the edge of my bed. The air rushed out of my lungs. My entire body went cold. This had escalated from a sordid case of fraud and betrayal to a cold-blooded conspiracy to commit murder. My son was supposed to die, all for money. Alicia, learning that Kyle had betrayed her to save his own skin, collapsed completely. In the stark, windowless interrogation room, she finally decided to cooperate. He told me dealing with a desperate gambling addict was too risky, she told the police, her voice laced with a bitter, venomous irony. He said that after it was all done, I'd probably have an accident too. That's when I knew I wasn't his partner. I was just another tool to be used and then thrown away. In the end, it was their own boundless reptilian greed and their utter inability to trust one another that destroyed their wicked plot. My family was saved because the wicked are ultimately loyal to no one but themselves. It was a brutal, ugly truth, but it was also our salvation. Hearing this final, horrifying piece of news, I felt no joy, no sense of victory or vindication, just a profound, bone-deep sadness that settled over me like a shroud. I was sad for my son, who had given his whole heart to a monster. I was sad for my innocent grandchildren, who would grow up with a gaping wound where their mother should have been. And in a strange, hollow way, I was even sad for Alicia, a soul so completely lost, so consumed by the cancer of avarice that she was willing to destroy everything and everyone around her, including, ultimately, herself. That night, I went to church. I didn't go to give thanks for our deliverance. I went to sit in my usual pew in the quiet, empty sanctuary and pray. A prayer for my son's broken heart. A prayer for my grandchildren's wounded futures. And a prayer for Alicia's lost and ruined soul, that she might find some kind of peace or redemption in the punishment that awaited her from the law and from God. I find myself sitting here now, in the quiet of my living room, flipping through old photo albums, pictures from Jake and Alicia's wedding day, from the kids' birthdays. In every photo, she is smiling. My son is beaming, the picture of happiness. It's so easy to believe in the photograph. Sometimes the hardest thing in the world is to accept the truth, especially when it shatters the beautiful picture you've held onto and believed in for so long. Have you ever had to face a painful truth about someone you loved? How did you find the strength to accept it and move forward? I'd be grateful to hear your thoughts in the comments below. On a Tuesday morning, Kayla called. Sophia, I have the final news. Her voice was calm, professional, devoid of triumph. Faced with Kyle's testimony and the mountain of irrefutable evidence, Alicia has accepted a plea bargain. She'll serve a significant prison sentence for fraud, conspiracy, and embezzlement. But she avoided a life sentence by agreeing to testify against Kyle for the murder conspiracy charge. Justice will be served, Sophia. I thanked her, my own voice quiet. I didn't feel victorious. I just felt the heavy, quiet finality of a tragic chapter closing. There are no winners when a family is destroyed. There are only survivors. Now came the hardest part of all. Jake and I sat down with Lily and Jake Jr. on the sofa in my living room. The afternoon sun streamed through the windows, but it felt cold. There's no easy way to say these words. There is no script. We didn't share the ugliest, most terrifying details. Jake, with a courage that made my heart ache with a fierce pride, kept it as simple and as honest as he could. Your mother, he began, his voice thick with an emotion he fought to control, made some very bad choices that hurt people and broke the law. Because of that, she has to go away for a long, long time. There were tears, of course. There were heartbreakingly innocent questions that we couldn't fully answer. When is she coming back? Did we do something wrong? All I could do was pull my grandchildren into my arms, hold them tight as they sobbed, and whisper over and over again that they were loved, that they were safe, and that their grandma and their daddy would always, always be here for them. A week later, Jake made the decision to sell the house. Too many ghosts in there, Mom, he said, his eyes looking off into the distance, seeing things I couldn't see. The house, once a symbol of their success and happiness, was now just a beautiful, empty monument to lies and betrayal. Every room, every corner, held a tainted memory. Selling it wasn't an act of defeat. It was an act of profound liberation. Jake decided to use the money from the sale to rent a smaller, simpler house near my apartment. A fresh start, a blank page for him and the children. I supported his decision completely. Sometimes, before you can rebuild, you have to be willing to walk away from a rotten foundation, no matter how beautiful the facade. I walked into the Federal American Bank a few weeks after that, but this time, I wasn't a frightened, naive victim. I was a wise and hardened survivor. Mr. Billy Rios, the branch manager who had been so kind, greeted me not with pity, but with a deep and genuine respect. He personally helped me restructure my finances, setting up a new, ironclad trust fund for my grandchildren's college education with the very money Alicia had tried to steal from them. Sitting in his comfortable, quiet office, signing the new protective paperwork, I felt myself reclaiming more than just money. I was reclaiming my agency, my clarity, and my dignity. It was a quiet, bureaucratic moment, but it felt like a monumental victory, a silent declaration of independence. A letter arrived one day, postmarked from the State Correctional Facility for Women. Alicia's sprawling, dramatic handwriting was on the envelope. My hand hesitated for a moment before I slid it open. It wasn't an apology. It was a long, rambling screed of self-pity, blaming her circumstances, blaming Kyle, even blaming me for her downfall. If you hadn't interfered, the letter began. I read the first few lines and then calmly folded the letter and put it back in the envelope. I realized I didn't need her apology to heal. Her forgiveness, her absolution, was worthless to me. I walked into the kitchen, feeling nothing but a calm, final resolve, and dropped the letter into the trash can. I would not allow her toxicity to enter my home or my new life, not even on a piece of paper. That Sunday, the sermon at church was about forgiveness. As I listened to the pastor's words, I had a sudden, profound realization. The person I needed to forgive most was myself. I needed to forgive myself for being too trusting, forgive myself for ignoring the little red flags, the small inconsistencies my heart had registered but my mind had dismissed. Forgive myself for allowing my deep love for my son and grandchildren to be used as a tool against me. I understood then that my trust was not a weakness. It was part of a good and loving heart, a heart that David had cherished. And I would not let Alicia's evil tarnish the best part of who I am. Forgiveness, I learned in that quiet moment in the pew, isn't about forgetting what was done to you. It's about refusing to let the past hold your future hostage. The rental house Jake found was smaller, but from the day they moved in, it was filled with light and laughter. I came over to help them unpack boxes. We weren't just unpacking dishes and books. We were creating new, untainted memories. Jake hung the children's colorful drawings on the walls. Lily carefully arranged her favorite novels on a bookshelf. There was no false luxury here, only a genuine, lived-in warmth. The smell of fresh paint mingled with the aroma of the chocolate chip cookies I'd baked. This was a home, a place of safety and love. We were in the small backyard a few days later, turning over the soil for a little herb garden. Jake Jr., his hands covered in dirt, looked up at me with his serious little face. "Grandma," he said, "I like it here better. I feel lighter." That simple, innocent observation held a profound truth. He didn't know the details of the betrayal, but he had felt the oppressive, toxic atmosphere in the old house. Here, he could finally breathe. I ruffled his hair, my heart filled with a simple, quiet joy. Jake started seeing a therapist. He told me it was the best decision he'd ever made. "She's helping me understand how I was manipulated, why I was so willing to believe the lies," he shared with me one evening. "I'm not just a victim, Mom. I'm a survivor, and I'm learning how to be stronger." Seeing my son actively confront his pain and take charge of his own healing made me immensely proud. True strength isn't about never falling. It's about how you get back up. With the legal battles behind me, I felt a need for a new purpose. I went back to the legal aid office that had helped me. I couldn't be a lawyer, but I could be a listener. I began volunteering as a peer counselor, offering a compassionate ear to other seniors facing similar situations. By helping them navigate their own storms, I was healing myself. My private pain had been transformed into a public purpose, a lighthouse for others lost in the dark. Our first Thanksgiving in the new house was simple. No giant turkey, no dozen side dishes. We had a rotisserie chicken from Costco, mashed potatoes from a box, and a store-bought pumpkin pie. But as the four of us sat around the small kitchen table, holding hands and saying what we were thankful for, it felt more real and more blessed than any lavish feast. We were thankful for each other, for peace, for a new beginning. It was Thanksgiving in its truest sense. One evening I sat down and wrote a letter. It was addressed to Alicia, but I knew I would never send it. I didn't fill it with anger or blame. I wrote only one sentence. "I forgive you, not because you deserve it, but because I deserve peace. I will not carry your darkness into my light." After writing it, I took the letter to my kitchen sink, lit a match, and watched the paper curl and blacken, the words turning to ash. I rinsed the ashes down the drain, a final, quiet ceremony of release. The past was finally where it belonged. A year can feel like a lifetime. It's not a blink of an eye, it's 365 days of small, quiet efforts. On a Saturday morning, I sat on the porch of Jake's house, sipping a warm cup of tea. From inside, I could hear the sound of Jake making pancakes, punctuated by the giggles of the kids arguing over who got the first one. The air felt light. The tension that had hovered over our family for so long had finally dissipated, leaving only the simple peace of a family just being a family. The storm had passed. The sky was clear. Jake had started a new chapter of his own. A few months ago, he had shyly introduced me to Sarah, Lily's third-grade teacher. She had a kind smile and warm, intelligent eyes. I could see the genuine respect and affection in the way she looked at my son. It wasn't a whirlwind romance, but a slow, gentle coming together of two people who had known heartbreak and were learning to trust again. Seeing my son laugh, a real unburdened laugh, filled me with a quiet, profound joy. Happiness sometimes knocks on your door when you least expect it. One afternoon, Jake brought a box over from a storage unit. It was filled with our old family photo albums and my late husband's woodworking tools. The four of us spent the afternoon on the living room floor, looking at pictures of a younger me, of a little boy with Jake's smile. Jake told the kids stories about their grandfather, about the wooden toys he had carved for him. Then he picked up David's old wood plane, the metal smooth and dark with age, and said to Jake Jr., "This weekend, I'm going to teach you how to make a sailboat." Watching them, I understood. The true legacy was never about the numbers in a bank account. It was in the stories passed down, the skills shared from one generation to the next, the love that binds a family together. My volunteer work at the Legal Aid Center has become a cornerstone of my life. Just last week, I sat with a woman who was weeping because her son had been stealing her Social Security checks. I held her wrinkled hand, listening to her story, feeling her pain as if it were my own. But this time, I had more than just empathy to offer. I gave her Kayla George's phone number. I told her about her rights. I told her she was not alone. To be able to turn my own scars, desaircels, into a source of strength for someone else, that is the truest healing I know. Stability has brought forth beautiful blossoms. Lily, once a quiet, timid girl, has joined the school debate team. She has a strong voice and a sharp, logical mind. Jake Jr. scored the winning goal for his soccer team last week. Jake and I were on the sidelines, cheering louder than anyone. These are the small, ordinary triumphs that are the clearest evidence of their healing. They are thriving, writing their own stories of success. Jake got a call from Alicia's mother. She was calling to apologize. A clumsy, heartbroken apology for the actions of her daughter. It was a short, awkward conversation, but a necessary one. It was like closing the last door to a long abandoned house. It didn't erase what happened, but it was a final acknowledgement that their world and ours were now separate. We were free to move on, unburdened by the ghosts of the past. I'm sitting on the porch swing now, watching the sun dip below the horizon, painting the sky in strokes of orange and purple. The kids are chasing fireflies on the lawn, their laughter the sweetest music I have ever heard. In the distance, I can hear the faint, cheerful jingle of an ice cream truck. It's so peaceful. This is the peace I fought for. It isn't loud or glamorous. It is simple and warm, and it is everything. The storm changed me. I am no longer the naive woman who placed her trust so easily in sweet words. I am wiser now, a better judge of character, but I am not bitter. I learned the difference between caution and cynicism. The hurricane didn't break me, it forged me into someone stronger. Most importantly, I found my own worth, a value that doesn't depend on my role as a mother or a grandmother, but on the intrinsic strength of a woman who dared to stand up for the truth. I think about my faith. It wasn't a magic wand that made my problems disappear. It was the anchor that held my boat steady in the middle of the tempest. It gave me clarity when I was lost, strength when I was weak, and the grace to choose justice over vengeance. My relationship with God is deeper now, more personal, a faith tested by fire. I watch my son playing with his children. He has become a calmer, more patient, more present father. I think about the money that was stolen, the house that was lost, the material legacy that was almost destroyed, and I realize our true wealth was never in a bank account. It was here, all along, in the love that holds us together, in the sound of laughter on a summer evening, in the quiet peace of a sunset. Lily runs over and climbs into my lap. "What are you thinking about, Grandma?" she asks, her big eyes searching mine. I smile and hug her close. "I was thinking about stories, sweetie, and how important it is to tell your own." I don't tell her the ugly parts. I tell her the story of a woman who learned to be strong, of a family who found their way back to each other after a storm. I am giving her the most important inheritance of all, the story of our own resilience. My story began in a cold hospital room, with the sterile sound of machines and a sickening truth. It traveled through tense lawyers' offices, stuffy interrogation rooms, and long, sleepless nights. But it ends here, on this porch, with the sounds of love. And in the stillness of the evening, I realize this is the only legacy that matters, not houses or money, but love, which no thief can ever steal, and truth, which will always, eventually, find its way into the light. Sharing that truth, not just with my family, but with all of you, has been a profound part of my journey. And I know that sometimes, when we sit together, stories just flow like a stream. Today, I wanted to open my heart a little, and I would be so grateful to hear your stories in return. You know, sometimes just a click on a screen, a like, a subscribe, or a share might seem like a small passing gesture to many. But to me, and to other quiet voices that need to be shared, every single one of those clicks is a small beacon of light in the darkness. It's a quiet way of saying, "I see you, I hear you, your story matters." It reminds me that we are not invisible. That simple click from you is a powerful statement of support for me, and it's the motivation that keeps me sharing these stories. After my story was told, something changed in me. For weeks, all I wanted was for someone to hear what was in my heart. And now that you have listened, I realize that what I want most is to hear what's in yours. Down below, in the comment section, I would be so honored if you would share a piece of your story with me. Tell me about a time you felt unheard. Tell me about a passion that others might have called silly. Or tell me about a moment you found your strength, even in the smallest, most quiet way. I will read them. I will carry them with me, because your story matters. We want to build Sapphire Revenge into a community where we can share these stories from the bottom of our hearts. I know you will have your own private stories that can sometimes be difficult to share with family or friends. I am here to listen, to share in your joys and sorrows, because we all have the right to be respected and to be heard. If you don't have sad stories like the one I've been through, then please share your happy ones, like a joy you received today. Please share them with me. That will be an abundant source of motivation, helping me and the other viewers watching this to heal, to find faith, and to find purpose in our lives. If you are watching on a television, please don't hesitate to pick up your phone and search for my channel, Sapphire Revenge. I truly hope to share these feelings with you. Let's build a community where we share our emotions in the most sincere way. Let's make this a place where we listen to each other, a place where no woman has to feel that her life, her struggles, and her triumphs are invisible. Thank you once again for sitting here with me. It means the world.